بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسول الله وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. اللهم لا سهل إلا ما جعلته سهلا وأنت تجعل الحزن إذا شئت سهلا. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. So first of all, assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Inshallah, we'll go ahead and continue with this week's hadith. And just for anyone who's new, essentially every single week we go through a hadith of the 40 hadith Imam Nawawi, and we give a short commentary on it, usually around 15 to 25 minutes, something around there. In the book I'm referring to, I actually have it today. It's called Jami' al-Ulumi wal-Hikam by Ibn Rajab al-Hanbali rahimahullah, which is essentially an explanation or a commentary of the 40 ahadith of Imam Nawawi, but he also added on 8 more. So the 42 ahadith plus 8 more, he described or commented on 50 ahadith. And essentially I read a chapter that week and then make a quick 15-minute talk based on the chapter, inshallah. So we'll go ahead and start. And the hadith this week should be pretty short. So inshallah we'll have more time for Q&A if there's any questions or anything like that, inshallah. So we'll go ahead and start with the 39th hadith. عن ابن عباس رضي الله عنهما أن رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم قال إن الله تجاوز لي عن أمتي الخطأ والنسيان وما استكره عليه. حديث حسن رواه ابن ماجه والبيهقي وغيرهما. So Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam, well, the hadith first of all is narrated by Ibn Abbas radiallahu anhuma, that Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam said that verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has tajawuz, is like he has allowed or forgiven, or essentially said that this is like I'll forgive you for this mistake. And he mentions 3 things. Tajawuz li an ummati, he has forgiven my ummah for the following 3 things, which are al-khata', which is a mistake, so an accident, and we'll get more into the definition of each one in a bit. Nisyan, and that's forgetfulness, so forgetting to do something. وَمَا اسْتُكْرِهُ عَلَيْهِ, and whatever they were forced to do. Istikrah is when you're forced to do something or outside of your own will, you are made to do something, but it's not something that you were pleased with doing in the first place. And we'll get more into the details of each and like the conditions, etc. for all of that. But one small thing I want to mention real quick before we get into the details of each one is in the commentary. He mentions وفي صحيح مسلم عن سعيد بن جبير عن ابن عباس قال لما نزل قوله تعالى ربنا لا تؤاخذنا إن نسينا أو أخطأنا قال الله تعالى قد فعلت. So essentially in Sahih Muslim there is a narration from a companion who says that when the ayah that I'm sure we all are familiar with, رَبَّنَا لَا تُؤَاخِذْنَا إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا, right? Well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, don't take us or don't hold us accountable إِن نَسِينَا أَوْ أَخْطَأْنَا, if we forgot or we made a mistake, right? Essentially, the narration says that when this ayah came down, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said, فَعِلْتَ, I will do so, for sure, right? So the point is that sometimes in different situations, when we're either forced to do something or we forget something or we make a mistake, the point is not to look into yourself and have this insane regret that why did I do that? So for a quick example, right? If you look at fasting, sometimes people when they're fasting, again, they might eat something on accident, right? And they might eat something, of course, not forgetting that they're fasting, and they might think that, oh, my fasting doesn't count anymore, or they might really regret the fact that they fasted, right? Or the fact that they ate. And essentially, this is telling us that the perspective should be the other way around. That at the end of the day, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has forgiven us for this, and there's no need to continue to essentially like regret that action. And in another hadith, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says, مَنْ أَكْلَ أَوْ شَرِبَ نَاسِيًا فَلْيُتِمَّ صَوْمَهُ فَإِنَّمَا أَطْعَمَهُ اللَّهُ وَسَقَاهُ. Essentially, Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa sallam says that whoever eats or drinks in a state of forgetfulness, that means he forgot and he drank or ate, فَلْيُتِمَّ صَوْمَهُ, and then let him continue and finish his siyam. فَإِنَّمَا أَطْعَمَهُ اللَّهُ وَسَقَاهُ, for verily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has fed him and has given him give him drink to drink. And the perspective that we have to remember is exactly in this hadith that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has given us this food or given us this water, even though we're supposed to be fasting, as like a ni'mah for us. So again, you don't want to have this, the mindset of a Muslim is not one of pure regret of the past. Because again, we see that not just Muslims, but humans in general, are all full of mistakes and we forget. The word insan comes from nisyan. The word insan, human, comes from the root word of forgetfulness, right? And we see obviously in the story of Adam alayhi salam how he forgot, right? The point is, the perspective needs to be one of accountability. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala going to hold me accountable for this or not? And then one quick other hadith that's mentioned before he gets into the details of the three categories I mentioned. He mentions وفي الصحيحين and in the two Sahihs, Sahih Muslim, Sahih Bukhari, عن عمرو بن العاص سمع النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم يقول إذا حكم الحاكم فاجتهد ثم أصاب فله أجران وإذا حكم فاجتهد فأخطأ فله أجر واحد فله أجر. So Rasulullah صلى الله عليه وسلم, the hadith narrated by Amr ibn As رضي الله عنه, he says إذا حكم الحاكم, if the judge, he makes a judgment, so let's say you have a court and the judge makes a judgment, فاجتهد, so he exercises his ijtihad. And over here I'll pause real quick just to explain what ijtihad is, right? So ijtihad in Islam is different from giving a fatwa. And the difference is minute, but it's important, right? Ijtihad in Islam is taking the Quran and Sunnah and understanding the ayat and ahadith that relate to a certain reality and understanding that reality to its fullest. And if, let's say, for example, you're trying to understand something that has to do with some kind of technical or some kind of technology aspect, you'll bring someone, even though this person's a scholar, he'll bring someone who is his specification or his major, for example, or his education is in this field, and he understands the reality to its best. He'll bring him to explain to him and understand that reality, and then he'll take the Quran and Sunnah and see what hukum can be extracted from this reality. So if that makes sense. So ijtihad is essentially, if you look at the linguistic meaning of the word ijtihad, it's to struggle or to really put maximum effort in this context to extract a hukum shari, to extract a ruling from Islam. So إذا حكم الحاكم فاجتهد, if the judge judges something and he puts his ijtihad, he puts his full most effort, right? ثم أصاب, and he's correct, فله أجران, then he has 2 ajr. وإذا حكم فاجتهد فأخطأ فله أجر. And if he goes and does ijtihad and he makes the judgment and he puts that ruling down, but he's wrong, made a mistake, فله أجر واحد, then he gets 1 ajr. So look at the perspective that Islam gives, that even when this hakim was wrong, even when he gave the wrong judgment, he still got 1 ajr. And when he was right, he got 2 ajr. And this perspective is very important to understand, because Islam, again, is a religion where لا يكلف الله نفس إلا وسعها, right? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala does not hold us all accountable except for what it can bear. So the point is that even in the case of a court where you would think the judge, he needs to be 100% correct, and if he rules wrong, then this will be bad against him, correct? But if you look at the hadith, it says فَاجْتَهَدْ, he puts his full effort, he does ijtihad, then even if he's wrong, he gets the ajr. So that's point number 1 I want to mention in this hadith. And then point number 2, a concept that we unfortunately see that's common among Muslims these days is that we have a lack of understanding or a lack of coexisting with other Islamic opinions, right? So for example, someone might be a Shafi'i, and someone's a Hanafi, and someone's a Hanbali, etc. The person who's Shafi'i might see himself as, oh, I'm the only one that's correct and everyone else is wrong. Or for example, they'll say it in terms of that your opinion isn't even valid in the first place. This hadith tells us very clearly that even when the person, this hakim, is wrong, if he puts his ijtihad, he does ijtihad, he puts his effort in, and we give the definition of ijtihad properly. If he does that process properly, then he gets 1 ajr, even if he's wrong. But on top of that, how do you know that he's wrong? You don't. And this is the point. And this is something, again, we sometimes miss as a community, especially with a time nowadays where we have madhahib, and sometimes people like to grab onto madhab and say this is the right madhab and every other madhab is wrong. We don't know, especially in places of ijtihad. In Islam, there's qat'iyat and dhanniyat. Essentially, there's definitive things that are qat'i, which is definitive, and dhanniyat is things that are, you could say, 99% or less. So there's no 100% certainty on this subject. Or for example, there's not one opinion on this subject. To give an example, of something that's qat'i. So obviously qat'i al-thubut and qat'i al-dalala, meaning it's qat'i in its transmission and its evidence, is the making riba haram, right? That's very, very clear. There's no two differences of opinion on that subject. But a common example of where there is two different opinions on a subject is, for example, the time of Salat al-Asr. There's two different opinions on the subject. And now, the point is, when we look at this topic of Salat al-Asr and other topics that are dhanni, I have to have the perspective that I'm following the ijtihad of, for example, a mujtahid, like I'm following the Shafi'i madhab, and I adopt this opinion to be the correct opinion, but there is the possibility that I am wrong and the other opinion is correct. There is that possibility. But in both cases, let's say I am correct, because again, we don't know. Only Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows which opinion is the correct one, the 100% correct one. But notice, the mindset of a Muslim is one of accountability in ajr. A Muslim is focused 24/7, everything. Sometimes we forget, but everything we do has to be towards getting ourselves to Jannah and avoiding Jahannam. So what I care about is, am I getting a sin for following this opinion, or is the other person getting a sin for following the quote-unquote weaker opinion? And the Hadith tells us very clearly that if the opinion that's correct gets 2 ajr, and the one that's wrong gets 1 ajr. So we have to have a mindset where we're tolerant of differences within Islam. And of course, when we say tolerant these days, sometimes it's taken a more liberal context. Of course, tolerant is within what the boundaries of Islam, what Islam allows. Islam doesn't allow difference of opinion on riba. Islam doesn't allow difference of opinion on different things that are qat'i in the Quran. On, for example, salah. There's no room for difference of opinion in these subjects because these are part of the qat'iyat. In the dhanniyat, there is more than enough room for difference of opinion. And inshallah, there's barakah and khair in that. And we see from the Sahaba again, the examples of also we mentioned before, where the Sahaba were on their way to Khaybar. The Prophet told them, don't pray Asr until you reach Khaybar. And one group of Sahaba took that as, okay, that means we need to rush over there and actually not pray Asr until we get there, even if Asr time is about to end. Another group of Sahaba, and they're traveling together by the way, said, no, actually this was just in like a metaphorical way, in a figurative way to say, hurry up. But the salah is obviously ala waqtiha. It is only at its prescribed time. We have to pray right now and then continue. And they both exercised their own opinions, their own ijtihad. And when they both came back, the Prophet ﷺ asked who was right. He said both of them. So again, that Islam has a culture of tolerance when it comes to difference of opinion within the things that Islam allows to have difference of opinion in. Inshallah. So to get into the 3 categories the Hadith mentions, we'll start off with the first 2. So the commentator, he splits the commentary from this point on into 2 different sections. The first one goes over في حكم الخطأ والنسيان, the ruling of mistakes and forgetting. And then the next part he goes into istiqrar. So he defines first of all الخطأ. He says هو أن يقصد بفعله شيئا فيصادف فعله غير ما قصده, مثل, for example, أن يقصد قتل كافر فيصادف قتله مسلما. So خطأ or mistake is for someone to intend to do something. He meant to do something, and his action accidentally falls upon something else without the intention to do that, and that wasn't his he didn't mean to do that. And the author gives an example, and he says that he intends to kill a Muslim, but then he accidentally kills, or intends to kill a kafir, and he accidentally kills a Muslim. So this will fall within al-khata, right? And والنسيان أن يكون ذاكرا لشيء فينساه عند الفعل وكلاهما معفو عنه بمعنى أنه لا إثم فيه ولكن رفع الإثم لا ينافي أن يترتب على نسيانه حكم. So the author mentions that definition of nisyan, of forgetting, is that he remembered something initially. So it's sometimes better to have an example when I explain this stuff. So let's say we have Dhuhr Salah coming up, right? You remember that you have to pray Dhuhr Salah, okay? You remember, but then after that, let's say for example the time comes and you forget. And all of this is ma'fuun an, that this is forgiven for, meaning that there's no ithim, there's no sin for that. ولكن رفع الإثم لا ينافي أن يترتب عليه نسيانه حكم. That even if he forgot though, this does not mean that just because he forgot that there's no hukum on this, there's no ruling on this, and that he just forgot and khalas to move on. That there's an action to take after it. So contrary to a khata, to a mistake, the mistake is forgiven for, whereas the forgetfulness, obviously depending on the situation, there's an action to take afterwards. So obviously a common example, which I'm sure we've all experienced before, let's say you planned on praying dhuhr after taking a nap, right? And you took the nap and you slept through dhuhr and you woke up for asr. Does that mean that you just wake up and you say, okay, khalas, I forgot, I don't have to pray dhuhr anymore? Of course not. It means you pray the qada and you pray the 4 rak'ats for dhuhr. And in that context, again, we talked about an example before of when someone's fasting, the mistake would be, let's say he eats or drinks during fasting, that person's siyam continues on and it's valid until the end of the day, and that person was fed and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave him drink. Now, for the second one, or the third category, in the second section of the commentary, which we'll probably spend most of our time here actually, he says, في حكم المكره. So the ruling on the person who is forced to do something. I'll read, it's a longer paragraph, I'll read it, inshallah. He says, أحدهما, the first one, or the first type, من لا اختيار له بالكلية ولا قدرة له على الامتناع. So we'll pause there. He says, whoever has no choice at all in this matter, and he has no ability to stop this thing, whatever he's being forced into, whatever he's being coerced into, he has no ability to stop it. كمن حمل كرها وأدخل إلى مكان حلف على الامتناع من دخوله. For example, someone who is carried and he's forced to walk into somewhere that he swore yameen. He said by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, I'm not going to walk into this place, or I'm not going to this certain place. If he was picked up and taken over there, this person is being coerced or is being forced into going over there, even though he said أما ما روي عن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم أنه وصى طائفة من أصحابه فقال. So, whereas the hadith or the advice the Prophet ﷺ gave to a group of his sahaba, فقال لا تشركوا بالله شيئا وإن قطعتم وحرقتم. فالمراد الشرك بالقلوب كما قال تعالى وإن جاهداك على أن تشرك بي ما ليس لك به علم فلا تطعهما. وقال تعالى ولكن من شرح بالكفر صدرا فعليهم غضب من الله. Surah Nahl. So Rasulullah ﷺ said he's giving advice to some of his friends or some of his companions. He says, لا تشركوا بالله شيئا. Don't make shirk with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, anyone or anything. وإن قطعتم وحرقتم. Even if you were cut into pieces and burned into ashes. And then obviously after that, the commentator mentions that the meaning of this is that these two ayat from Surah Luqman and Surah An-Nahl. So the reason why I mentioned this hadith and the link it has to what I said before is that the perspective the Prophet ﷺ gave to his companions is one of resistance. It's not one of leaning into, it's istiqra, I'm being forced to do this, I can't get out of it. Because a lot of the times here in the West, we have a mentality of, okay, this certain action, it's not good, it's probably haram, I shouldn't do it, but at the same time, it's all I can do. It's all I can do. This is the only option I have. Or for example, if we look at, especially in politics, especially in politics here in the West, people will easily and more willingly lean towards either voting or they lean towards supporting a candidate who very clearly supports LGBTQ. And they'll say openly, again, why? But whether that person, they themselves as Muslims believe in LGBTQ or not, that's not my point. But they support LGBTQ. Why? Because to get into that political position, to get to where they are, they have to support LGBTQ, right? So that person himself will use the excuse of, this is coercion, it's istiqra, I'm being forced to do this because of what? Because of a benefit, right? Or for example, the people who are voting for him or supporting him or making a campaign for him will say, yeah, 100% we're Muslim, we agree this is wrong, but we can't do anything about it. And they'll try to use these principles that come from his hadith to support their position. When we see the advice of Rasulullah ﷺ, he says, "In qut'tum wa hurriqtum," and even if you were cut into pieces and you were burned to ashes, right? We see another hadith, another incident where the Prophet ﷺ, he was in Mecca, and Khabbab ibn Arat and some of the other companions who were tortured. Go and read how these companions were tortured. Unbelievable amounts of torture. Unbelievable. And they came to Rasulullah ﷺ asking him, won't you make dua to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us victory? Because we're being tortured to an extent that we can't handle it anymore. Make dua for us to get victory. We've been waiting for so long. And the response of Rasulullah ﷺ is he mentions the examples of the people before them. How they used to have, like parts of the hadith, it says, a comb of metal used to be taken on their body and shaved. And that person will be tortured to the max. Like it talks about saws and cutting of the body, etc. In the end of the hadith, Prophet ﷺ says, and none of that would ever make them turn away from their deen, except, he's mentioning, he's talking to Sahaba now, except you guys are people who don't have patience. So the advice in the position of Rasulullah ﷺ in Mecca, it was more than clear. In a situation which, again, like ours today, is not, it's not one where you have Islam around you, and it's not one that a Muslim is very easy for him to practice his deen in. Especially when we're talking about the example of politics and other examples, right? The Prophet ﷺ didn't take a compromising route. And we can't take these ahadith or the principles that come from hadith out of context, in the sense that I can't use them, and again, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows my intention, I can't use them to say, oh, you know what, I'll take the easy way out. Why? Because clearly, whatever I'm being coerced into, whatever I'm being forced into is forgiven for me by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So again, to end off with one last example of this, the Prophet ﷺ in Mecca was offered everything that these days we would take in a split second, instantly, right? He was offered power. He was offered a position in society. He was offered everything from a dunya perspective. Quraysh came and offered him women. They offered him everything he wanted, right? And they said, all you have to do is just compromise. All you have to do is 1 year, we'll worship our deen. Another year, you'll worship your deen. But you'll be the ruler. Imagine. Take this example, and we know the rest of the hadith, right? But take this example and apply it to today. Imagine today, someone came up to us and said, look, you can become, for example, the president of the United States, right? And you can have the power, right? And again, we knowing what's going on in Gaza and other places in the world, you can have the power. But just 1 year, we'll have Islam. But another year, we'll put that to the side, and we'll bring it back the next year. We'll trade off, right? Sometimes we think in this perspective that if I can get the benefit in this dunya, if I can do whatever I can to get this position, especially in a political context, if I can get this position, then I can make change, and it's the right way to make change, and this will benefit the deen. When in reality, the response of Rasulullah ﷺ, what was it? Wallahi am, wallahi, my uncle, if you were to put the sun in my right hand, the moon in my left hand, I would never leave this deen. Or another ratio, I would never leave this amr, this command. So the command of Rasulullah ﷺ was a very clear one. It was one of no compromise. It was one of a straight path where tawakkul is in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and the ultimate perspective is that if I follow what's halal and avoid what's haram, even if I have a perspective in this dunya of it's harming me and it's not benefiting me, the ultimate benefit and the ultimate harm is in the Day of Judgment. And inshallah, when you follow the halal, it will take you to Jannah and also lead to prosperity in this dunya. When you avoid the haram, it will move away the harms of this dunya and move away the harm of the akhirah, inshallah. So enough with that. Jazakumullah khairan. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.